I'm not sure my record's going to work, but Monica, you're recording it, aren't you?
Yes, I am. And maybe Philippa, you can also press record and we can have 2 or 3 different options.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, so officially, let me welcome everybody here today. Thank you very much for joining this WISTA first webinar that we've held in this new virtual world. We hope you have a great time. We do want this to be fully interactive. So as we said earlier, please use the chat, put questions there. If you put your questions into the chat, and if we don't get enough time at the end, we can actually then come back to you with answers. So do use the chat facility to put in questions as the things are going on. We are recording it and we will put it onto the WISTA website, but if anybody has any issues with that, let us know. And then we will turn off the record if you're actually talking or asking a question, that's fine. We want everybody to take part, so we'd rather you take part and turn the record off than have it recorded and you not take part. I'm going to hand over to Monica now, who's going to do the MCing for tonight. Over to you, Monica.
Thank you very much. So as you said, this is our pioneering effort into webinars. We've done a few within different organizations, so we see no reason why we shouldn't be reaching out to our membership through this medium. So thank you very much, Sue, for supporting this initiative, and thank you for the introduction. So this was actually an event that we had planned for April, and we all know how April worked out for all of us. This was planned for Women's Day at the Guard UK office. We had even ordered lunch and beer for all our members, but you know, now it's just all of us talking about what we planned to talk then. So it was a talk with female seafarers, or seafarers, I've just come to realize, who happen to be women. The conversation doesn't change. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Monica Kohli, and I'm a senior lawyer in the defense team at Guard. I've been doing shipping law for the last 20 years. Yes, I am older than I look. 10 years of which was with Guard, and 10 years before that as a barrister in India. So I'm dual qualified. I also come from a shipping background. So my father is a captain, was a captain. Basically, it's never stopped being a captain. And I was pretty much born and sailed for the first 5 years of my life. And I always thought that I would be a sailor. And because I grew up in India, I didn't have access to women who sailed, and I could never become a sailor as I thought I would be, like my daddy, you know, and the white hat and the white clothes and, you know, sailing around the world. And that was my dream. So when I moved to UK and I met amazing women, it's always fascinated me. And there's a bit of regret that I didn't do what I would have liked to do. My brother, on the other hand, did join sailing, but he never had the dream. But, you know, he got to be a sailor, and he sailed with Chevron and tankers. My father sailed with General Cargo. And we're very, very fortunate that we've got both speakers from both fields on that today. So our first speaker, let's move on to the meat of the presentation today. We're going to try and do this within an hour. Our first speaker today is Philippa. Philippa is an ice pilot, but she's also been sailing since 2008. Navigating worldwide, carrying a variety of goods on board cargo vessels. She became the first and only female officer on her company when she joined. She fought hard, and we all know what it's like to be the first woman in anything. You have the hardest job. You have to clear the road for everyone else. So thank you, Philippa, for clearing it for everyone in your organization. But then she found that just cargo vessels wasn't enough. So she moved on to ice vessels, and then a research and supply vessel in Antarctica. And she has a specialist skill now, which is ice navigation. So Philippa, why don't I hand over to you and you tell us all about your life and career, and take it away, Philippa.
Thank you, Monica. Now, I've got to try and share my screen if I can remember how to. Bear with me. Here we are. There you go. So as introduced there, my name is Philippa. I'm a master mariner and also an ice navigator. I'm invited here today just to talk a little bit about life at sea for me and some of my experiences. I first went to sea in 2008, so when I started my cadetship on general cargo ships. Worked my way up through the ranks on board on a number of different ship types, and also I worked my way up through the ranks academically. I sailed up to chief mate on ferries, and I got my master mariner license in 2016 when I was 28 years old. It says that I did move shoreside in 2018, so I've been in my current company 2 years. I'm actually in a different role now, because halfway through I did leave and go back to sea as an ice pilot on board a luxury super yacht. So I can't quite stay away. So first I'm going to talk about general cargo because that's where I started. This picture is taken on my first trip as third mate. I was on board the Dover Castle here, 27,000 gross tons. And the sister ship in the picture is the Leeds Castle. I did part of my cadetship on board, and a few months after this picture was taken, I actually went back on board Leeds Castle as third mate, and I was promoted to second mate after a couple of weeks. The contracts there were 7+1 months, so it meant after 7 months they might think about finding a port to send you home from. So usually it was an 8-month contract. Yeah, and this picture we're on our way, we're in the Baltic, so it's also my first experience of ice. I didn't really think much about ice navigation, to be honest, but maybe it did mean something to me looking back. We're on our way there to Ust-Luga in Russia. We were loading coal. So my presentation really has got a lot of pictures, some quite embarrassing. As I said, as you can see in the picture as well, the ships were quite old. We had a fleet of 28 ships when I was there. Most of them, if not all, were older than me. So as you can see, we had open lifeboats there in a couple of them. And what I loved about the job was the variety. So we were mostly on voyage charters. We were tramp ships. I don't know how many of them really exist anymore. I did feel like I was going back in time when I was working on them. But we followed the cargo. We went wherever there was cargo. I've been all over the world. Carried grain, coals, steel products, pipes and plates, granite blocks, even paper, scrap metal, you know, absolutely everything. But it wasn't really as glamorous as it may sound. Again, we're referring you back to that picture of the almost burnt out looking ship covered in rust. And we did spend a lot of time in high risk areas, piracy areas, war zones. I spent a month on one ship in Iraq, which wasn't very pleasant. A bit like I'm feeling today, a little bit too hot for me there as well. And a little bit about piracy areas. We used to pass through there roughly every 40-45 days on one voyage I was on. And we usually took a convoy, which meant we teamed up with ships that were doing a similar speed. Our speed was 12 knots, so you just feel like you're in the high risk area for quite a long time. And that was our safety sort of thing. One trip we took armed guards, which is where I was made to have a photo with holding a gun, which I didn't really want to do, but peer pressure from the crew. And that was the one time that we were actually shot at by pirates, because we were sort of hugging the coastline from Yemen up into the Gulf of Oman. A little bit of a scary experience. I had been chased by pirates before, seen a lot of them around, and I think you don't really think of it at the time. You just get on with your job, and it's not until maybe afterwards you look back and you think what could have happened. Yes, so it's not really a glamorous life, and it's a little bit scary. At the end of that charter, we got a bonus, and it was about $50. And I remember thinking, you know, is my life only worth that much, sort of thing. So I was looking to go elsewhere. But then I had the offer of going back as second mate, so I obviously jumped at that chance, went back on board. And here's a few pictures of some of the crew. On a ship that size, we had about 20 to 25 crew on board. As Monica said in the introduction, I was the only female in the company, so I felt like there was quite a bit of pressure on me to perform and do well, because everybody in the company seemed to know my name. But I obviously didn't do too badly, as I was promoted to second officer. It was a bit like having 25 uncles, I think, a lot of the time. You are a family, you do 7 or 8 month contracts. You live with these people 24/7, whether you like it or not. So yeah, some good friends, some not particularly pleasant people, but I guess that comes in all walks of life, not just on ships. So yeah, there were quite a few cases of bullying, harassment, that kind of thing, discrimination, which I think we're going to talk about a bit later after the presentations. One particular captain I sailed with really disliked me. He would call me all sorts of names on the radio, no shame, you know, anyone in the port who tuned into that radio channel, or everyone on the ship, heard him just saying, "Where is that effing girl?" Every day I was, "You're nothing, you're below zero, you don't know anything, why are you here, you should be pushing a pram." So I think at that age I must have been sort of 20, 24, 25 maybe. I was a bit more feisty, and I sort of took it upon myself to prove him wrong, and sort of, yeah, I think maybe nowadays I might have just got off the ship in the next port, but yeah, it certainly inspired me to work harder and prove to everyone really that I could do the job. I was more than capable. At the end of the contract, I cheekily said to him I might extend, so, so yes, I didn't, and I did move on from cargo ships, and I found myself in the polar regions. Now the polar regions are becoming really popular. There's a lot of expedition companies working there, a lot of yachts that want to go there. And what I will say about the Polar Code now that was introduced in 2017, the course that you do there requires you to have sort of the certificate they give you is actually only operating in polar regions. So let's say I'm on a ship that operates south of 60 degrees south. I can get my certificate in polar operations, but I might not actually have seen any ice. So what I have is the Nautical Institute's license, and they take it to that next stage, that next level, to show that you have competency. And for that certification, you need to actually operate in ice. A bit like this picture here, which was my first trip when I was in Antarctica. Some of you may know this ship. It's the James Clark Ross, operated by the British Antarctic Survey. She was built in 1990. She's going to be retired at some point, replaced by the Royal Research Ship Sir David Attenborough, which again might be something you've read about in the news. So I think it's quite a good thing that these things are starting to come a bit more mainstream now, and a lot more people seem to know about them. When I worked here, it was a whole new experience compared to, you know, general cargo. Science was a big, other than the ice navigation, we did science work, we did research, we did fun things as well, like seal tagging, where we'd find a seal on the ice. We'd put some scientists, land them on the ice, and they would walk over and sort of put a little GPS antenna on his head to track them. And another one, which was quite interesting, I enjoyed the fishing, krill fishing. I was actually the best officer, they told me, at fishing. I managed to get the nets in at the right time and get enough krill, again, just for their science research. So it was complete range there. We did all sorts, even including sort of mapping the seabed, which gets a little bit boring, sort of doing sector searches. I've got some pictures here of Antarctica. The wildlife there is incredible. It's out of this world. You can't even demonstrate this in pictures. Surrounded by whales, surrounded by penguins, seals, the birds. And there's a picture of me there again in one of our workboats. So because of the location of the bases, or the bay that the ship, that the scientists may want to go into, the ship can very rarely actually get there. So James Clark Ross was a DP class ship, so she'd sit off outside. Most of the time we probably didn't need DP, we would just sort of rest into the ice. And we'd launch our humbers, our small workboats, and a cargo tender, and we would then ship the people, the supplies, or do whatever that we needed to do. Small boat work, again, something new to me. Really good fun. Not so much fun when you've been in the boat 12 hours and it's freezing cold and you've gone numb and you probably, you know, you struggle to stand up to get out of it at the end. And also then you're thinking, you know, I've got to go on the bridge and do my chart corrections. But yeah, good fun, hard work. And then just more pictures. Everyone loves penguins. Unless you've been to Antarctica, because I think then penguins become a bit like pigeons are in the UK. You know, they're everywhere, they're noisy, they're smelly, but they are really cute. I just want to make a little point as well about the picture in the bottom right, if you can see that, the ice edge. It's really hard to sort of quantify how big everything is in Antarctica. Like the mountains, the icebergs, everything is just giant. Here we measured that ice edge with a sextant, and the calculation, I can't remember the calculation now off the top of my head, but we calculated the height to be about 67 meters, I think it was. And if you think that, what's that in feet, 220 feet, and if you think that, you know, 90% of that, the ice is under the water, that's pretty big. So that's really all I have in pictures. I do have, as I said, a variety of experience. I went from Antarctica to ferries. I did a bit of high-speed catamarans and some ro-ros. I also did a year on cruise ships, and then I found myself back in Antarctica. That passenger experience coupled with the ice experience, obviously expedition companies were after me. Then I did move shoreside, and currently now I work for an Italian cruise company in West London. I work as the deputy of the fleet operations department, and also I'm a nautical quality assurance specialist, quite a mouthful as a title. So I write and implement on board the procedures for navigation, sort of, and passage planning, that kind of thing. And I also have a hand in accident investigation, reviewing BDRs, and also a little bit as well about the new builds, because everybody's building cruise ships despite the pandemic, it's still going on. The new designs for bridges and sort of how to make them user friendly as well. And that's about it from me. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Philippa. It was always fascinating. I love your little story about the penguins being smelly. I can't get that out of my head. I keep thinking, oh my God, do they stink, do they? So
they really do, yeah.
No, thank you for sharing that. And I think it's quite impressive, your experience overall, you know, last 10 years. And I think you still want to go back, don't you? You're still looking.
I really do want to go back on board, yeah. I thought the office life would be something, it was a novelty because I'd never done it, and yeah, take me back. I need to go back on board.
The novelty has worn off, has it?
Yeah, definitely. It's that commuting as well.
Yeah, your commute was a lot shorter on board, wasn't it?
Exactly. Yeah, you roll out of bed and you're there. Yeah.
Yeah, and I have a few questions for later, but I thought maybe let's just ask you one question before I move on to Jessica. How did you get into shipping? Can I ask you that right now?
Yeah, so it was a little bit of an accident, really. I sort of, somehow my brother heard about it. I'm not sure whether it was through a friend. And I was about 14 or 15, and I went to look around Fleetwood Nautical Campus with him. It's the marine school up there near Blackpool, isn't it? And I remember the man who was showing us around kept putting this prospectus in my face, like, we need more women, would you like to join? And my dad was like, she's only 14, leave her alone. It's not like the olden days, we can't pack them off to sea yet. So, but it was in the back of my head. And I did go to college to do my A-levels. I was doing maths and further maths and German and sort of history, just sort of the things I liked doing. I didn't really have a career in mind. I didn't know what I was going to do. And yeah, when it came to applying for university, I thought, oh, I need a degree in maths to work out how I'm going to pay for a degree in maths. And then at the end of it, what do I have? So as I said, this was sort of in the back of my mind. And I thought, I'll do that, because you don't pay for a cadetship. A company sponsor you. They send you to college. They pay you a minimum sort of training allowance, but you don't need it because, you know, your accommodation's provided. When you're on board, your food's provided. So everything was given to you. They paid for all the education. And I thought it was great because after a few years, I just got my officer's watch ticket, no debt. And my friends were just finishing uni with pretty much what I was earning a year in debt to pay off and no job. So yeah, winner.
Yeah. Fabulous. Yeah, I think that's the thing. You start earning so young in shipping, don't you? And it's all tax-free. So,
exactly, as well, yeah.
Exactly, yeah. So
especially with the 8-month contracts.
Yeah.
Out the country a long time.
Yeah. Peter, we will come back to you because I mean, initially when we planned this, we did plan to bring Peter in a bit. I don't know whether he'd be happy for that, but hopefully we'll bring him in a little later and ask him some of these questions also, if he's willing to answer and if he's not just muted us and run away.
I thought I was here for moral support, that was it.
Yeah, this is moral support.
I was expecting more heckling, yeah. Where was that, Peter?
I thought I'd be kind.
Oh, thank you very much, yeah.
No, thank you, Peter. Thank you for volunteering. I will ask you some questions later. And the one thing I've realized, Peter and Philippa, is a geek is a geek and a shipping person is always a geek. There's nothing you can do about it, you know. It doesn't matter what gender you are, what age you are, where you come from. You kind of, shipping brings you together. And that's one of the things I love about shipping. It's so international, and you see it in our offices also. It's always international. And I found when I moved from India to UK, I fit in very easily, and I knew more people because we'd interacted anyway through across the world. But let's move on very quickly to someone who has seen shipping even longer than you have, Philippa. She joined sailing in 1988, a bit before your time. She joined the Merchant Navy, progressing to the ranks and finally sailing as master. Wide variety of vessels again, starting with oil and gas, passenger vessels, tugs, super yachts, small boats. But it feels like I'm doing her presentation. So I'm going to just hand over to her to talk about her passion for the sea, her passion for all things marine. Captain Tyson, over to you. Please take over and tell us all about your experiences at sea.
Oh, good afternoon, everybody, even if I can't see you. Hopefully not too many of you have had to listen to me too often, so it might be something different. But if you have heard me before, I'll apologize in advance. Just bear with it. People keep asking me. So I'll see if I can do the technology bit. Good grief.
I also expect you, Jessica, to talk about your meritorious medal for meritorious at the end of your presentation, because I didn't mention it. I'm sorry about that, but I hope you will mention it.
Don't worry about that. I'm still trying to figure out how the hell that happened. It was lovely, but I was still trying to figure out how it happened. Right, let's see if I can get this technology to work. Right, hopefully we've got everything ready and going. Well, this is where I am now, which is down west. So down towards Bristol. This is the River Parrett of the Somerset Levels fame of flooding. So this is where my office is generally these days. A little bit far away start. So currently I'm a pilot and a deputy harbour master, and with a little bit of extra bit of marine surveying on the side. About a couple of years ago, it was primarily surveying with the pilotage duties and a little bit of deputy harbour mastering, but because of a change in who's employing me, I'm now more primarily pilotage and deputy harbour master. If anybody is unclear where the Port of Bridgewater is, you will probably have heard of the Hinckley. Hinckley's
go back to, I think you're not on slideshow, Jessica.
Oh, I've gone back. That's
yeah.
exciting. There we go. Port of Bridgewater. There we go. It's getting ahead of itself, so I'll go that way. Right. So
okay,
what have you got?
It's frozen. I think you'll have to share it again.
Oh God, it says stop
Stop.
sharing. I hate this.
No problem.
Right. I've got to try and get the tech. I'm going to have to try it on this one. It's decided to do weird stuff. You are screen sharing, it tells me on mine. Ah, there we go. We'll try it that way.
Perfect.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm going to have to do it on the bottom instead. That's fine. It didn't like my my tech this end. Okay. So yeah, if you don't know where the Port Bridgewater is, it's just a little bit east of Hinckley. So where they're building the new power station. Everything to do with Hinckley basically has to come through our port. So that's going to keep us sort of busy. Not as busy as we'd like, but sort of busy because their wharf is within our berth, or within our port rather. So I went away before, I feel a little bit like before Philippa was even born, which is making me feel incredibly old, but I don't generally feel too old. But I went away in 1988, and essentially that was because I kind of left school with A levels, and I was going to go and do estate management at Cirencester College because I came out of a school where you always went off to university. I had no desire to go to university. Then I had some issues with having to think what I was going to do with the year off, and I eventually ended up at home down in Cornwall near a place in Foy, which is down on the south coast, and I ended up going with a pilot, go up and down the sides of ships. So he has much to much to be held accountable for. So, and I had a few friends that I met, and so eventually I thought, well, let's go and give it a go. And 60 companies or so later, because this was in the late 80s where everybody didn't want anybody, eventually I ended up being taken on by the wonderful BP through a manning agency, basically. Essentially, they were there like cadet recruiters. So this was my first ship, which doesn't look that very big, but it was 25,000 tons. So when I arrived on it in Singapore, it looked enormous. It looked like the biggest thing I could ever possibly get on. Now I'm probably a little bit blasé about it. But yeah, so I ended up on oil tankers, and I think it was a great grounding. I think it's probably the same sort of thing as if you go into general cargo. I think it can end up giving you a really good grounding towards anything else, because there are certain things you have to know about oil and gas that you possibly don't always have to do in other things, much the same as you've got the IDG code for bulk carriers, etc. So you actually have to learn it right from the grassroots up. So this was a little product tanker. We went, I've not been as north as Philippa. I've been up as far as north of Vladivostok, which is where I had my first Christmas. And we were actually working Christmas Day. And one of my enduring memories is playing Pingu, using the chart, waiting for go in with the chart or with the crew, playing sort of basically tiddlywinks on the chart. We created our own thing. So you have quite a good, you get very inventive when you're at sea, if nothing else. So yeah, I'll stop blathering now. This obviously is another one. This is a VLCC. So we did a variety of different ones. This was obviously crude, so learned about crude oil washing. Also had some interesting, if you go 3 times around a vessel like this, it's about a mile. So if you do sort of 6 laps, which I used to do because it used to keep me entertained, out at sea, you're doing a good couple of miles. It's your own personal gym, and it's on water. Who could ask for more? Changing scenery, so keeps you occupied. But yeah, no, this one was also an interesting one, because when you go on these big ships, you don't realize that they actually are built so that they can flex. So you suddenly realize the sort of magnitude of the size and the quantity of it. 1.8 million barrels worth of oil. The other thing I would say is that ships even this big are still at the mercy of the sea. Having been off South Africa when I fully loaded one of these, we had very big South Atlantic rollers coming in, and it basically came over the front of the deck and basically ripped off part of the walkway just through the sheer volume of water. So every ship is a little bit vulnerable, even if it's big. This is, oh, have I gone too far? No, I've got the next one. Sorry, I'm looking at 2 screens because I've got one that doesn't really work and one that does. This is obviously an LNG ship. This again was an education. When I was sort of testing whether I could deal with technology, I was telling them how one of the favorite tricks was these are Moss-Rosenberg types, for those who don't know, and they're basically big spheres sitting in within the ship. And they have this thing called crack before failure. So essentially, if you got a crack in it, you would know about it because all the liquid gas would go down to the bottom, and there was a detector down there for the liquid methane gas. And basically, their favorite thing for anybody new was to get you down the bottom, and then they would shout gas, 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 and you'd have to run from the bottom to the deck, which is some 20 odd meters plus. I can't remember the exact dimensions. So by the time you got up there, trying to talk coherently, if it was an emergency, would have been interesting. But it also makes you realize that ships can actually be, they're great places, but the reason for all this wonderful training is that they actually can be very, very scary places if the lights go out, and there wasn't an awful lot of light down there. So yeah, you suddenly realize you could get lost really easily. But it was an interesting one. This one ran between Northwest Australia, Dampier Bay, and up to Japan. And again, met some amazing wildlife, met some interesting locals and local wildlife when we were down in Dampier Bay, including tiger sharks. So didn't do too much swimming down there, leave them to it. So having had my jaunt with BP, we kind of fell out. I got to as far as May. I was doing my master's ticket. We fell out for a variety of reasons, including a difference of opinion about why a tank had overpressurized. And they felt that they needed to, in those days, they weren't quite as good at listening to both sides of the argument. So we parted company. and I had a fairly bad taste in my mouth, considering I'd been with them since a cadet up that way. So that was like 10.5 years with them. So I then went for something entirely different, which was the WinStar Cruises, which was through an agency. Again, since we're talking about, you know, I suppose we're talking about women at sea, life at sea, the things that can happen. And it still always amazed me was that the person that was trying to recruit me spent most of my interview trying to persuade me that cruise ships weren't all that they were supposed to be jacked up to be. But being the typical headstrong woman that we can all be, I totally ignored him and said, yes, but I still want to go. So I duly did. And one of my first ships, this was the first ship that I turned up on. And I was, they put me on there as like a senior second mate, the sort of sail person. So I had lots of fun. These masts are about 265 feet up, so nearly as big as your ice shelf. So I used to go swing on the end of that in a bosun's chair to get up the top to look at stuff. And I mean, I did a lot of sailing when I was young with my dad and stuff. So to me, it was just like a big toy. It was terrific. I actually didn't have any winters for about 2.5 years because basically she followed the sun. I went through the Panama Canal on her for the first time, and that was extraordinary because she then looked very small compared to a lot of the big ships going through. And obviously all the history there, it just made you really appreciate. I mean, I've been really, really lucky. I mean, I've got to drive boats in a bikini and a radio and get paid. So what more could you want, really? So, you know, you don't really need to worry too much about that on a light-hearted manner, I would add. So, yeah, carried on. Now I've got to figure out whether I can get my technology going again. I love it. So, having done that, I did have, again, it sounds like I'm a walking disaster area. It got to a point where I had a few people that were making life very, very uncomfortable. I was still at senior management. I was sailing as mate when I left. And I got to a point where I realized I didn't actually want to go back because I was having to deal with a chief engineer who really didn't like the fact that I was technically second in command. He felt he should be. And so I sort of turned around to the company and said, right, look, you know, I feel a bit stressed about this. I don't think I want to go back unless you're going to do something about this. It isn't something that didn't happen. I had chats with the master. It's not like we all sort of disappear off ships and go complain after the event, but you've got to have people that are willing to take action on board and ashore. So unfortunately for me, it did happen, but after I'd gone, and it was somebody who was much higher up in the actual owners, the owner's side of things rather than the actual company that hired me to be there, which is unfortunate because otherwise I might have still been there and I could have probably been master there, which would have been more fun than where I ended up. But nonetheless, I then returned to oil because, you know, it's sort of familiar, and I ended up on a FIP. So that was 90 miles off Tunis. I had to deal with some interesting cultural. My French was pretty rusty when I turned up there. Their English was probably better than my French. Again, it was interesting because you learned a lot about having oil platforms, flares, all sorts. So you get a different understanding of the oil world rather than just, you know, loading oil and discharging oil. You actually learn about what has to happen before it can actually go in your tanks, what they're actually trying to achieve, and the kind of maintenance that goes on. So it was very much a joint effort when we were on there. This one was the ex-Northia, who was from the Shell ship. But when I was on her, she was called the Ickdam. And yeah, as I say, the only thing I had to deal with sometimes was having live sheep on board at least once a year for the Aids. I very politely used to say, no, it's okay, thanks very much, I won't attend. So I used to just wait for, I just used to make sure the sheep had a dignified end and made sure they were happy before they met their untimely demise or their inevitable demise. I had no issue with it per se, it's just, it wasn't for me, essentially. But a lot of the people there were tremendous. I'm still in touch with many of the crew who I sailed on there, who are obviously a very different culture from me, and they never made me feel unwelcome. I probably had more problems sometimes with people of my own race, for want of a better word, even if that's probably fairly un-PC at this point, but nonetheless. This one I ended up having to stop doing because they basically nationalised, they wanted national crew, which is fine. So I then ended up on the mighty Waverley. I don't know how many of you, if you're all here, I'd be going, so how many of you have been on the Waverley? I had a fabulous time on here. It was hard work. It was a great way of seeing the UK and the UK coast, and it made you appreciate so much your own coastline. She is probably one of the best teaching tools of how to maneuver a ship, because she's like a flying brick, just because you have paddles that are basically midships and epoxy little rudder. So you have to sort of run at every berth at about 6 knots before you sort of slide in sideways to land in the right place. We ended up going as far north as Col and Tyree, and I think it's called Mendelssohn's Cave, where they've got the fancy caves up there. We went there, went through the Cars of Bute, which was again interesting when we had a yacht that thought she would try and say, but I'm a yacht, you need to get out of the way, which when you've got about, I don't know, less than a couple of inches either side of you going through the Cars of Bute, and you're doing it at 13 knots, it's not, and they've got an alternative route, you go, we're not stopping. So there was a lot of hooting that went on for that. So yeah, I did that for a year, and then I moved on again because it was just hard work and it worked for what it was. I then did a series of various contracts, one of them being one out in the Azores, which was for a salvage job. This is the best surfing beach in the Azores, in Horta. So I went there and I was working with Dutch and all sorts. Dutch, South African, English, all sorts, everyone. And it was a tremendous time, and it was a tremendous family. So as you can see, this one, she'd gone in and had a bit of a problem with not understanding the whole concept of volcanic islands and the fact that things shelve up very quickly. She had an 8-meter draft, and she ended up parking in a bay that had one depth sounding on it, on a fairly small sized chart, and it was with the prevailing weather because it was on the northwest of the island. And essentially she ended up being parked there. The Greeks had a good go at getting her off, but got as far as getting most of the fuel off and not much else. And so then Nick Sloan, who most people will know from the Costa Concordia, he was the man that was there doing it. In fact, I think possibly because he was very successful at doing this, but he's a great man for saying anything's possible. And he's a very good leader in the sense that he collects people together that think outside the box and do stuff. So it was a great pleasure working with him, and I learned a lot about pilotage. All 3 tugs that you can see in that picture, hopefully everybody can see it, we weren't man enough to actually pull the whole thing, because we had to turn it through 90 degrees to then try and pull it off. And then we also, so we had to borrow a big anchor handler from Maersk on the way to the States, who had probably more bollard pull in its little prop than we ever did it with all 3 of us. So it came along, hooked on, and then she managed to shift it. It was quite an interesting time, because just before we started pulling her off, we had to deal with the tail end of some hurricanes coming through. So when you're on the end of a piece of wire, keeping a position on a vessel that is not DP, and none of these vessels were DP. I think one of them was the one that's the red coloured hull here. She was about the only one that could maintain position without actually having to be driven. So you just had to monitor all the time where you were going, what was going on. So when she did go off, she went off like a 10-bob rocket, and then we had to chase her, and she eventually sank about 2 miles off because she had a hull crack around number 3 hold. She was an icebreaker. Well, she was ice strengthened, so she probably, the reason she survived that long with so much pounding was probably because of that well-structured bit of building. So yeah, she was called the CP Valor. So yeah, I should think probably some of you know her through different avenues, whether it's insurance or anything else, because there was a lot of people involved in this because it took a long time. One of my trips was bringing back one of the tugs with an Italian barge. It was about the size of a football pitch, full of all the containers that had been on there, because they had to go and then be sorted out, and all the it had to be arbitrated and all the rest of it. You couldn't just sort of like throw it away. So we had rotting birdseed and theatrical props and mini diggers and God knows what else that was on this boat, all with about 12 months worth of seawater adding to the flavour. So it was an interesting time.
But you're going to have about 5 minutes, and then we're going to do an answer. So
that's all right. No
warning is coming up.
Jolly good. You knew I'd overrun. I then ended up coming ashore because I ended up having too much fun. So I ended up with kids. I did a bit of freelancing. This is the Magellano, which is an Azimuth Benetti super yacht that I went and did sea trials and was doing some stuff for them. And then we're going to go to other little tugs that I did. So this is me doing all the other things that I love doing. My children used to be parked on the back of the water taxi before and after they were born. And I still do occasionally do the time. The vessel in the middle is in fact my dad's yacht, which I still sail. So if anybody wants to buy it, that's fine, because he's older than the boat now. So anyway, I will leave it there. I have a few other slides, but I think I have suitably run out of time.
Do you want to show us your latest pilot boat?
Oh, yes,
Yeah,
I better
quite enjoy it. Why don't you move on to that?
There we go. You're going to get a quick whiz through Port Bridgewater. Dun, dun, dun. These are the ones that come to visit. That is my new boat, or will be my new toy, or our new toy. I shouldn't say it's mine. It's been a labour of love. And this is one that's the same type, but is not ours. But this is what she looks like side on. The design is supposed to be much more fuel efficient, and it helps the ship stay in alongside and keeps your transverse stability. These boats can actually do transfers about 16 knots with no problem at all. They're very well built. The yard is exceptional and has been to date. So we're very much looking forward to it, and we hope to be taking delivery properly in July. So despite Corona, slight pause, but despite Corona. So there we go. And that is the Port of Bridgewater when you get off, just before you get off the ship. So you don't have to go far for beautiful scenery. I shall leave it there.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you. That's very exciting. You did actually beat me to my question, which was how did you join? You've already told me how you joined. So I was going to ask you a question that we have spoken about before, which was, have you ever faced any issue or discrimination that you felt that was especially yours because you were a woman? And you can, yeah, go for it.
Yeah. Did I face any discrimination? I suppose I came up against people that I viewed as being tough. In my head, I didn't view it as discrimination at the time. I suppose looking back with the kind of microscope that we have these days sometimes, then yes, you could view it as discrimination. But at the time, it was just, they were sort of telling me I couldn't, and I was saying no, but I can, and I'm going to. And I think a lot of most young men and women, all you're looking for is an equal opportunity, an opportunity to have a go, to be given some chances, to be given some support to go forward and learn stuff. So yes, was I discriminated? Yes, I think probably. Not so much when I was probably coming up through the ranks, but certainly when I got up towards senior levels, I used to find that there were some things that, as I say, the chief engineer that didn't really like me being second in command, he was actively obstructive. I had another second engineer on an oil tanker when I was a watchkeeping mate who used to actively, we'd have a meeting in the morning, we'd determine what's manpower, what did you need? Do you need some of the bosun and the sailors? He would then go and hijack basically the bosun and the crew when I was having my nap in the afternoon. And so the work that had been programmed was then not happening because he was sort of, this was more important, and he was appealing to the more machismo side of that particular bosun. There are ways of doing it. I luckily for me, I didn't, you either play the game or you just go, I can do this better. Eventually the chief engineer who was there could see, and basically he took him aside and said, wind your neck in no uncertain terms. And then it settled down, but I hadn't actually gone and said, it's a problem. I had a very good group, and I think some of it is about communication, but I think some of it is also just, it is their problem, not yours, because at the end of the day, if you start taking it on board, then you're saying that I own it. Well, I don't own it. It's your issue with me, not my ability to do the job. And this is where I think, I'm a great advocate for, yeah, by all means, go to sea, but understand the situation you're going into. It is like being on an island. You can't get off it, even if you're on ferries. You're there back and forth, in and out. It's still part of the community that you live in for that period of time. If you're going to do that, you've got to go within with your eyes slightly wide open, because otherwise you can see issues that don't really exist sometimes, because you're expected to be like it would be shoreside. It's not. But that is not to say that what goes on ships sometimes and the way things happen should be or isn't acceptable. But keep it in context. Young men these days, and probably ever since time immemorial, can be just as susceptible. It's just they're less inclined to be vocal about it, in my experience, having had to deal with an 18-year-old that got accused of basically sexual harassment by a dancer on board a cruise ship because he'd been a little overzealous in checking her life jacket. And instead of it actually being sensibly sorted out, this poor lad was made to feel like he was some sort of sexual predator, and it was very poorly handled. And I had a young man there who had lots of potential. He was so enthusiastic. And essentially I had to say to him, look, you know, this will go through, you know, stay strong, sort of thing. And I felt for him because he was in tears. Well, you don't see young men in tears very often. So, you know, it can be just as cruel to young men as it can be to young women. As I say, that's my own personal
fair enough, yeah. But I loved your thing, saying people telling you couldn't and you saying I can and I'm going to, and that applies to all of us, I think. I have tons of questions, but we have a lot of people here. So, I mean, anytime you want to ask a question, in fact, I would encourage everyone to unmute, especially Philippa, and start answering questions and asking questions. Peter, I noticed that you have a second connection to our crowd. You introduce us to Philippa, and you also sail with BP. So, you know, there is connection to both of our panel. You had some interesting stories. So one of the things we discussed is the difference between the older crew and the younger crew, men on board, and their interactions with women. Peter, do you want to mention some of our stories or your stories on board?
I should probably point out I also left BP under a disagreement as well, which seems to be a common common theme on that.
I'm going to say that's for a beer or a very large glass of wine.
But,
later on.
Yeah. I when I was at sea, there was few female cadets coming through as I started, and the longer I was at sea, we started to get more and more, which is obviously a positive, but it was still few and far between. There was definitely a difference in the attitude from the shall we say the older generation of seafarers towards women, and then the younger generation. I think you know, the way I saw it was the younger generations to be more open-minded towards the idea behind it, whereas a few of the older captains that were quite set in their ways seemed a bit put out by the idea of having women on board.
Do you think that's true the whole way around? Because I got to say, my experiences sometimes has been that actually I had better experiences with some of the older captains, the more experienced.
I was about to say the same thing. Yeah.
And some of the younger men who, even today, even going as mate or anything else, and later on in life, still there is much more of a sort of us and them mentality in many.
Oh, really? I mean.
So I mean, perhaps it's perspective for, as far as, you know, the male-female thing goes. I don't know, but certainly that was my experience. Is that not all of them were like that. But, you know.
That's fair to say. I mean, when I say there was certainly some, it was a handful that I could think of. There were certainly some great captains that just got on with it and it didn't make any difference. But I do remember sort of one of the females I sailed with, who was my cadet, and then when she came back as an officer to relieve me, she was sort of telling me some of the issues she'd had with certain captains. And I know the story Monica wants me to tell, and I'm going to avoid telling it in this.
Oh, go on. Go on.
So there was one female cadet on board that got on very well with the chief mate. And when the fire alarm went and she didn't turn up to a muster station, someone was sent to find her, and she was seen running out of the chief mate's room, missing quite a lot of clothing, which was a bit awkward. But they are now in a long-term relationship, so it has worked out in the best for them. They've been together 4 or 5 years now, I think. But other than that, I think there was.
Peter, I was going to ask actually, is that the one I know?
I don't know. I can't remember now.
Oh.
I'm saying no.
I don't want to
names.
mention any names, so let's
we'll
not.
discuss this
But
later.
there is that. I think sometimes that we do get a bit of a bad reputation on board. Like people think you're on board, therefore you've got to be sort of getting
Shagging
involved.
somebody.
Yeah. Well, I was going to put it more politely, Jessica.
Don't hold back.
Well, you know.
And there is that sort of old-fashioned mentality that women are actually bad luck on board. Now, on my very first ship as third mate, I joined in New Orleans. We were at anchor. My first ever watch, actually. 1 minute past 8 in the morning, boom, the boom of the crane smashed onto the deck. The whole ship shook. Everybody came up. What's happening? it was actually the electrician who'd done something wrong. But yeah, it was my fault. We sailed into New Orleans, up the river. GPS failed. For some reason, there was something wrong with the fire pump. They ended up taking that apart. US Coast Guard obviously saw us coming with the boom on the deck. Came on board, we were detained, and the captain made a wonderful presentation with classical music. It showed all the problems that we had, and at the end, my certificate of competency sort of came spinning in and was like a full screen. And I said, "You can't send that to the company." And he was like, "Oh, it's just a joke." I'm like, "Yeah, for you, but actually a lot of people do believe that. That's not, you know." So yeah, we are seen as bad luck.
Yeah, the subconscious bias reinforced is not something you want at all. It's not even subconscious. Most of the times it's quite conscious. So yeah, that is interesting actually. Yeah.
No, I didn't have too many of those. I mean, I sailed with white crew. My first trip as a cadet, I sailed with white crew and a white bosun, for which I'm very grateful for, because I learned a huge amount from them. I actually had more, I think the more issues I had, well, not issues, but the more things that I had to deal with was more to do with the cultural issues, because when you get multicultural issue crew, you've got to be very, very careful about how, you know, not about really restraining the way you are, but you just have to be aware of what the way they view women in their own cultures. And that doesn't mean to say that you need to be different. But for instance, you know, I sail with a Filipino crew a lot, Indonesian, Sri Lankan, Pakistani, Indian, anyway, lots of different types. The Filipinos, I had one trip where I had one particular sailor who obviously had taken a bit of a shine to me for whatever reason, but if I didn't smile at him, even if you were preoccupied, if I didn't smile at him, he thought I was angry with him. So then he'd be like really worried and concerned about it. So you'd have to assure him that it wasn't, that it was fine. And then you have to adapt certain things so that he felt like he was okay. So, I mean, but that's the same with almost anybody. I mean, you know, I've had some issues with some officers who got some bright ideas, even though they've just been talking with you, they're suddenly sort of declaring undying love, which is very flattering. But, you know, you go, well, how did I not see that coming? You just think you're having a conversation with somebody.
I've had several marriage proposals from Filipinos. I have the same experience. They all seem to be in love with you because you're nice to them. So yes, very.
And you become cultural ambassadors on board because you're representing your entire culture, and you find that everywhere.
Yeah,
so one
but it's also it's hugely interesting. Because you learn so much about their countries and the way their governments work, and they're actually usually very oh god, yeah. I've had fruit crumble made out of crystallized you know, little diamonds, because it was fruit crumble and they were fruit crystals, and so he made fruit crystals as the main bit with the crumble on top. Custard was needed.
Okay, we're gonna try and keep to time, so we're gonna try and wind up in 5 minutes. So I have a couple of questions which I'm hoping everyone will be able to answer at different times. Would you choose a different career at all, or would you stay with being in shipping? Philippa, do you want to go first? Would you regret your choice, or would you change it?
No, not at all. Part of me thinks, you know, if I'd have stayed with one company, I'd probably be sailing as captain by now. But I found that most places I went, they didn't quite meet my standards. That's pretty much the reason why I left a lot of companies, was I thought, you know, this isn't good enough, and I went elsewhere. So yeah, no, definitely I'd choose this career again. As I said in the beginning, like, you come out at the end of it with a qualification. Yeah. That's even if that's a starting point.
Yeah, we do have a recruitment consultant on board. So yeah, there we go. We have a question from Teresa. I thought we would have one from Singh, so you do know that you can ask. As a lone female on board a ship full of men, did you ever feel, I missed the last one, did you ever
afraid?
No.
I mean, I typed it in, but I've come off mute.
I saw it as well.
You know, if you're in a vessel, and there's all men around you, and you go to your bed at night, do you ever feel afraid or intimidated? Did you ever have that feeling?
To be honest with you, I mean, I was fortunate in the sense that I was the BP, when they took us away, and when there's cadets, they wouldn't send female cadets away unless they were with another female cadet or another cadet. Right. So yeah, no, for the most part, no, I never did. I think largely because you're kind of one of the guys, but not one of the guys. They'll be the first people to give you shtick, They'll be the first people taking the rip out of you. They'll be the first people being quite unpleasant sometimes. But, you know, if you just keep your nose to grindstone and show on, and it's not about always being the onus on being us, but if you just go on and do your job, actually what usually happens is they'll come round, and they may not want to, you know, feel some degree of respect or feel that you can do it, but they will eventually just do it, and they get on with it. And actually, you know, it normalizes life for them in many ways, even having a female on board. Remember, there are a lot of wives that sail on board as well. A lot of girlfriends come on board. So it's not a complete abnormality, but it certainly improves things. The difference is that you occupy a very peculiar kind of sphere, because you're actually part of the workings of the ship rather than additional. And that sometimes messes people's heads. But no, I never felt afraid. I don't know about Philippa, but no.
But just before you answer, we also have Fazilet, who I know has also been a sailor. So maybe after Philippa, Fazilet, if you do not mind chipping in, it would be lovely to hear from you. If you don't want to stay mute, that's fine. So Philippa, go ahead, and then we'll go to Fazilet.
Yeah, I think from my side, over the past couple of days talking with Jessica, I think we've realised we've had a bit of a different experience maybe where we started out. I'm just gonna say I was quite good at deck work, and I always had my deck knife with me, let's say that. I did have a few incidents, but going back to that sort of family mentality, a lot of people on the ship would not necessarily, they'd notice something that was going on. So I had an incident once with a chief engineer, unfortunately a high ranking sort of officer, tried something, let's say, and he was Eastern European, but all of the deck crew were Filipinos. One of them somehow found out about it, and that was it. They all made his life hell. They would go to him and say to him, you know, they were like, you know, the people become very protective of you, I think, on board in that family thing. You do get the odd sort of bad eggs, but on the other side of it, you've got other people who are willing to go and sort of, you know, sort them out for you. So yeah, interesting. I don't know, because I went there, so maybe, you know, there was a time when I thought, should I go back on board? But I think again, with being a bit young and fearless, I was like, you know, why should they ruin my career? I'm going to go and prove them wrong. I actually sailed again with that chief engineer, and he felt like an idiot, I think. You know, he'd avoid me in the mess room. He would sort of grovel slightly, which is a little bit unpleasant, but yeah, he was just being overly nice, and sort of he knew he did wrong. Yeah, so I think there's just all sorts of experience that go on at sea that, you know, we shouldn't necessarily have to deal with, but they do happen. And rather than sort of doing the girly thing and crying, and then they kind of win then, don't they, I think. So no, prove them wrong, stand up to them.
Yeah, I think there's probably a lot to be said for that. I also think that, you know, it's, as I say, I keep on banging on it, because although women do face particular things, because we're just by numbers, we're not there, you know, that some of the things that we deal with are actually not so different for a lot of our male counterparts. It's just because we end up under the microscope because we are small in number, and we're an easy target then. It's like anything, you know, if you have, I don't know, different hairstyle, or you're different skin color, or you're this or you're that, if you're in a minority, you become an easy way of being got at, because, and it's usually their own fear about it rather than actually being the issue. If you can get past the fact, if they can get past the fact that they think that you are something odd or something weird that they don't know how to deal with, if you can get past that, and you just keep plugging away, and sometimes you have bad crews, sometimes you don't, it's no good whether you were all of the same you know, persuasion or whatever. You know, you could have how many women all get on, how many men all get on. You know, the reality is you've got a whole different load of people in a very small space who are reliant on each other for entertainment, for working, and also in an emergency situation. And if you don't understand those people, or you don't, you know, kind of understand or feel part of it, you know, kind of potentially you can feel quite precarious. So in some ways, it's almost a key thing to become part of that community in whatever form it has to take, until you can establish yourself to then sort of do that, because actually, you know, your life could depend on it. And what you don't want them doing is leaving you behind if you were the last one to come out of some smoky filled environment, you know. I'll stop talking now, because I seem
Monica,
to be doing
you're on mute.
Oh.
Could see her mouth moving.
Sorry, yeah, thank you. Thank you for saying that. I was just going to say, I know about Fezlet, but if there's anybody else who has experiences, please unmute yourself. I don't know everybody on this panel, so I've only called on the people who I know. So apologies for that, but that's because I do know about your experiences. Fezlet, go ahead.
First of all, my apologies for coming in late. I had something crop up all of a sudden. Actually, I have to say, I mean, I had, like all the other, folk, we had to prove ourselves in the first 3 weeks. So the first week you were the best thing since sliced bread, and the second week you were going to get into trouble, and the third week, then people start evaluating how good you are at your job or not. So yeah, I used to always, I guess somebody once said you were really feisty, and I think that's a really good way of putting it.
It's a great word.
Yeah, so I never took any rubbish from anybody. I didn't care who it was, from the captain to the galley boy. Everybody was, was going to get a tough time if they gave me a tough time, and that worked for me.
I ditto.
Sorry?
I said I probably worked along the same way as
yeah,
Bridget on
I think we
telly.
had to, really. I think we all kind of had a little set formula, if you like, and we all sort of used that, ship in, ship out. But I did find one thing, that sometimes, as soon as you walked on the gangway, you kind of knew if you were going to get a hard time or not. I don't know what it was, but you would have that feeling would just come, envelop you, and you'd say, yeah, it's going to be a tough one here, or it's going to be an easy ride. I have no idea why that used to happen. But yeah, no, I mean, I spent 30 years at sea, so I wouldn't have spent 30 years if I didn't enjoy it. So for me, it was...
When did you start sailing?
I started, I'm going to give my age away now. I started in 1984.
Okay, so close to Jessica.
Yeah, I was going to say 1988, so you're not that far, you're not that far ahead, man.
Yeah, so and I just gave up about 4 years ago. So I just. Yeah,
I probably would still be there, but I kind of hadn't enforced. I had too much fun ashore and ended up with children. So you pays your money, takes your choice.
Yeah, no, I really had a good time. I loved being at sea. I loved meeting all the people that you do. And yes, it was quite funny actually. Seeing as everybody's giving their experiences. But there was this one guy on a diving support vessel, and he used to give me a hard time no matter what was happening every day. And then one day I said to him, I said, you know what? I said, I'm glad you don't have any daughters, because I'm sure, you'd be a really nasty father. He said, I've got 4. And I thought, what?
Wow.
And I spoke, would you like them to be treated in the same way that you are treating me day in, day out for the last, 2 weeks? And he said, I never thought of that. And do you know, he changed literally 180 degrees from where he was at, and he became the nicest man possible and used to sort of champion my cause. So it really startled me.
The communication, very important. That's quite a nice thing. I must remember that next time. Anybody who's troubling me, go, do you have a daughter? How would you like your daughter to be treated like this? And that's a nice way for people's perception to be shifted also.
I think you find tools to get around it. I mean, I always used to do with crew, as I'd say, right, you may not sail with a woman. This is what you can expect from me. This is what I expect from you. I'd rather you ask the question the same time 3 times over than cause, make a major problem by getting it wrong. Because to me, you're only as strong as the weakest person underneath you. If you're the further up you go, you need to make sure the whole crew's in behind you. Because if they're not, you're an isolated person, and you're never going to really be very successful. I don't know if Fazlet feels the same way, but that's certainly how I used to approach it, which is, you take me as I am. This is what you can get. If you're going to give me shit, then you'll get shit back in spade loads of back. Sorry, excuse the language for anybody that's... I keep on forgetting. I'm sorry.
I think if we're all seafarers, we don't have to forget that.
We have someone from Turkey joining us. I know I can see the rest from UK. Some people I don't know. So thank you very much to Isa Asli also for joining us. We hope you've enjoyed it. Sue will run a poll right now, and then, maybe you can answer a few of those questions. And I'll just wind it up by having one more question for our panel, which is basically, what would your secondary career be? If you had to give it all up at sea, what would your secondary career be? And every seafarer can answer this if you like. Do we start with Philippa?
Oh, what's going on? Sorry, I was reading the poll question.
What would your second career be?
Oh, no, I don't want another career. Do you know, I was quite interested in law, and then thought maybe about maritime law, but then I think
do it, Philippa. You can still do it.
Yeah, I kind of thought maybe it takes a bit too long. I'm going to go to sea because then I get to go straight to sea. You know, your cadetship day one, you know, week one, you're on board. So yeah, I was a bit impatient really.
Okay. But see,
I am doing sort of distance learning. I just got a diploma in ship superintendency, so I might do a degree in something if I find the time. But my job's quite. There's still time, right? I can change my career.
Yeah, I mean, I would ask you something completely different: gardening, or opening an organic shop. Nothing like that. See all the way, is it?
I kind of feel like that's where I am now. I can't really think outside of the box so much. Maybe detective. There you go. I'd love to be a detective.
Very good.
Like Philippa, a proper Sherlock detective.
Perfect. Jessica, you had more time to think. I'm sorry, Philippa, I brought you right in there.
It's all right. It was a pop-up.
I kind of got my second career, haven't I? I came ashore unexpectedly. I was Saigas master. I was kind of getting my feet going, and I was quite happy there. And then like I say, too much fun. So I had to kind of go sideways, and I had to think about it. And I've been very fortunate with the people I've met, particularly up in London and various other places, and friends who've been very willing to show me what was out there, because as a seafarer, you know that there must be other jobs out there, but trying to find them sometimes or feel where you should go to get the best sort of access to them can actually prove quite difficult. So I was fortunate enough. I happened to meet, Helene Peter Davies, who many of you will know. She's now a partner in MFB, and she's an ex-seafarer. She was working at MFB, and I met her sort of mentor, and it was actually up at a Nautical Institute thing up in Gateshead when I was when I'd been ashore for about a year. And I went up to a seminar up there, and I met a whole load of people, and then they were very positive and gave me lots of positive things, and then said, come up for a week and we'll show you the different aspects. And I got to go to Lloyd's, I got to go and see lawyers, I got to go and see surveyors, I got to go and see all the things that I kind of knew were out there, because you sort of do it when you're on board a ship, but you'd see it from such a singular kind of lens when you're on board a ship as an officer. You deal with all the stuff, but it's all in relation to the ship. Whereas when you go out, when you go back out into the real world, or back on a dry land, suddenly there's all these very different very necessary parts to keeping shipping going that are actually there that you can access. You don't have to go away to sea to be part of the marine community. It's in a very different way. But like I said to you before, my genuine belief is that we need to get this into primary schools. Career teachers need to be given a good set to, because half the time they don't know. You need to get kids at a young age. Why is it not in our curriculum? We're an island nation. I mean, for goodness sakes, you got to let people know it's there. They should know it is there, but there should be a pride in the fact that we can, and there is this great career out there in a variety of different forms. You thought about going away to sea, Monica. It didn't quite happen because of circumstances, but you're still within the marine community doing a very valuable job that helps with it. There are many people that do it. Teresa's in the crewing aspect of things and stuff. So it's, we're all out there doing our little bit, and that is what creates the whole industry. So it isn't just about, it is critical that we get officers and sort of feet getting wet, because otherwise you're not going to have the experience that can then be filtered back down through the rest of the industry, because that is actually quite lacking. But some of the times people need to adapt a little bit so that normality can continue. So anyway, I'll shut up now.
No, but that's perfect. I don't know, Sue, if you want to, we're going to wind up here. I think we've gone over the time we had planned. Anybody else with any comments? I think Sue's been involved in the careers bit of it. Sue, do you want to talk about that, and then we can wind up?
No, I mean, I think it's really interesting. I'm just going to give the poll results.
Oh, yeah.
It's actually a 50-50 split to how you got involved in shipping. 50% was through the family, and 50%. Oh, no, it's just changing now. Hold on a minute. As I speak, it's changing. So 44% now is family, 44% by accident, 11% by careers advice. So I think that's really quite interesting. And it sort of bears out what we're feeling is about 50% of the people get involved in the industry because some member of their family is involved in it. So I think that actually does mean that what we're thinking of and the help we need to give going forward is really right. Experience. It's really interesting. 78% said they've had a good experience. 22% said they've had a bad experience. 78% said they would recommend career maritime to their friends, but only 44% of them would actually recommend it to a family member. So it goes down. So I think that really is an interesting insight to how people feel or what people feel about the industry.
But do you think that it's because of a protective aspect that people would not recommend it for a family member? I mean, truthfully, I have that. People say you're going to let your sons go away to sea. The answer is if that is what makes them happy, because my parents, in the days before you had mobile phones, I disappeared to the other side of Singapore. And I know my mother, I only found out sort of 2-3 years later that my mother had been having kittens. But she nonetheless let me do it because she knew I was going to go and do it anyway. So I think sometimes that 44% is because of people wanting to protect their children from some of the bad experiences they might have had. I don't know. It's an interesting debate.
It is a very interesting debate, and one of the things we've found out in some of the work we've done for careers, not just in maritime, but maritime is in there as well, is a lot of the time the decisions made by the mother rather than the child to what career they have. And that's really interesting. So one of the bits that Julie and I have been looking at is how we can actually do, as long as I go into schools, but actually doing some more work talking to the parents and maybe looking at parents' days and things like that, so you can actually explain to them more about the opportunities and the career paths. Because if you got that block, then you're not going to get anywhere anyway. So maybe sometimes some of the career work we're doing is actually at the wrong person.
Yeah, I think it's a fear factor. It's a fear of the unknown. If you don't know that the Merchant Navy exists, how on earth can you then understand what it is you might be sending your child into? Everybody understands what the Army does. Everybody understands a variety of other things of where different people go into, but nobody really knows what I've been to a school thing where I went into a classroom of 16-year-olds near Weston-super-Mare, and that was 9 miles away from the sea. Bristol Channel, Avonmouth, Portbury, loads of ships going in and out. And when I said, what is the Merchant Navy? Does anybody know what the Merchant Navy is? Because I was in there for a career day. I had about one person or two that put their hands up, and all they could think of was ferries. They're children that are living, really very close, virtually on a coastal town. And they didn't know, and they were 16-year-olds. So how on earth can we expect them to then pick a career? A lot of people you find out in the middle of the Midlands, but in the central part of the UK, quite often end up with it because they've either got an inspirational person or they've met somebody. It isn't necessarily always through careers. Occasionally it's through careers, but very rarely. And the vast majority of the rest of them, it's usually through friends or they just happen to they stumble across it. There's some great videos around now, and there's definitely everybody's beginning to read off the same page. But honestly, I wrote to 60, 70 companies and I had 2 replies. Granted, it was a different circumstance, but if you don't, and that was through just a lot of writing to any company I could think of in those days. You looked up a list and you got a list and you started writing. These days, it should be a lot easier. But I do think there needs to be a bit of education, as you say, in different quarters, but also just at a much sooner level. It should be part of the curriculum in my book. But anyway.
So there you go. The results are available for everyone.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, and I think that actually leads me nicely on to the Women in Maritime Task Force have paid through WISE, which is Women in STEM Education, how to go into schools and help people understand career paths. And we've got a special maritime one now that we've done with them. And we're looking for people to be train the trainers, so people that would volunteer to train other people to go into the schools to deliver the whole program, because the WISE program is based off of NLP. So you need a little bit of understanding about NLP and how to deliver the program. So if anybody would like to volunteer to be a train the trainer, we've got 30 places for, we can train 30 people, and then those 30 people can train as many as people as we want out from there. So it'd be really useful if anybody would like to do that, to let me know either through the chat or just send me an email to sue@imageline.co.uk. And then it'd be really good to hear from you. I'll let you, Monica, wrap up now.
Yes, thank you very much, Sue. I just wanted to do thank you very much to our panel. I mean, it's been incredible to chat with you, and not just today, but through this series when we've tried to rehearse it's been great to learn so much about your experiences. It's made me feel so nice to see women at sea. It's really been incredible. To Fezlet, Isa, I'm sorry you haven't spoken today, but maybe another time. Thank you for joining us from Turkey. Tomorrow is the International Seafarers Day. So to all the seafarers on the chat, outside, our parents, our families, a big shout out to you, especially in these challenging times when seafarers have gone way above and beyond. They've been stuck at sea for months. They're still getting goods across to our doorstep. So to all seafarers across the world, happy International Seafarers Day. To Philippa and Jessica, thank you very much. Sue, thank you very much for hosting this. Thank you, WISTA, and I'm sure we'll see you again virtually and then in real life shortly. Thank you. Stay safe, everyone.
Thanks very
Bye-bye.
much.
Thank you.
Bye.
And if anybody wants to volunteer to be a speaker at another event, let us know, because we're always looking for good speakers, as we've had tonight.
You're getting bored of me, Sue.
No, never.
Never. Thank you, everyone. And anyone who wants to chat, we'll just stay online for a little while to
Yeah, I'm leaving it open for anybody who wants to chat. You can unmute yourselves now.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. We'll end the seminar. I'll end the recording, at least from my end.
Excellent.
Off the record chatting, yeah.
Then